He was just a tiny French Bulldog puppy, passed from shelter to shelter, each one turning him away as if he was a burden too heavy to carry. His small paws carried the weight of rejection, and his eyes told the story of loneliness no puppy should ever endure. But then, when hope seemed lost, one woman opened her door, and what happened next would change both of their lives forever. This is not just a story of rescue. It's a story of second chances, love, and the extraordinary bond between a human and a French Bulldog. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications so you never miss more emotional and inspiring stories like this one. The sound of barking filled the small, overcrowded shelter on the edge of town. Behind the rows of metal bars, dozens of dogs waited, some pacing in circles, others pressed silently into corners. Among them was a small French Bulldog puppy named Oliver. His fur was a soft cream color, but his big round eyes carried a sadness that even the volunteers couldn't ignore. Unlike the other dogs who barked to grab attention, Oliver stayed quiet, curling into himself, as if the world had already proven too harsh. Oliver's story was already tragic despite his short life. At only 4 months old, he had been surrendered by his first family. They had claimed that he was too much work and that his breathing difficulties, common in French Bulldogs, were a burden they couldn't handle. Instead of patience and care, Oliver was met with rejection. He was dropped off at the shelter with nothing but a small blanket and a look of confusion in his eyes. The staff did their best, but shelters were overwhelmed and resources were stretched thin. Oliver was placed up for adoption quickly, but potential families passed by his cage again and again. Some said he looked too sickly. Others simply wanted bigger, stronger dogs. Eventually, Oliver was sent to a second shelter in the hopes that he might find a better chance there. But the same story unfolded. People came, browsed, petted other dogs, and moved on. By the time he arrived at his third shelter, Oliver's spirit seemed almost broken. His once playful nature had faded, replaced by quiet resignation. The volunteers noticed how he no longer wagged his tail when people approached his cage. It was as if he had stopped believing that anyone could love him. His tiny chest rose and fell with effort, his breath sometimes wheezing softly in the night. To many, he looked fragile, and fragile was not what most families were searching for. One rainy afternoon, as the shelter prepared to close for the evening, Oliver sat huddled in the corner of his kennel. The staff whispered about the possibility that he might never find a permanent home. The thought was heartbreaking, but in shelters, hard decisions often loomed when dogs were passed over too many times. But fate, as it often does, had other plans. That evening, a woman named Emily walked through the shelter doors. She was in her mid-30s, with tired eyes but a kind smile that immediately softened the room. Emily had been through her own share of hardships. After a difficult divorce and years of loneliness, she longed for companionship. Not just any, but the kind that comes with unconditional love. She wasn't searching for the perfect dog. She was searching for a soul that needed her as much as she needed them. When Emily passed the rows of barking dogs, her eyes fell on Oliver. He wasn't trying to get her attention. He didn't jump or wag his tail. Instead, he simply sat there, his big dark eyes meeting hers with a mixture of sadness and quiet hope. In that moment, Emily felt something shift inside her. It was as if the little bulldog was speaking directly to her heart without a single sound. "Who's this one?" she asked softly. The shelter worker sighed. "That's Oliver. He's been overlooked a lot. He's already been through 3 shelters. People don't seem to want him." Emily knelt by the cage, her hand resting on the cold metal bars. Oliver's nose twitched, and after a hesitant pause, he shuffled closer, pressing his tiny face against her fingers. For the first time in weeks, his little tail gave the faintest wag. At that instant, Emily knew she wasn't going home alone. What she didn't realize was that bringing Oliver into her life would not only give him a second chance, but it would also begin a healing journey for her as well, one that would surprise everyone around her. Emily signed the adoption papers with trembling hands, hardly believing she was about to bring Oliver home. As the shelter worker placed the tiny French Bulldog puppy into her arms, Emily felt the weight of his frail body against her chest. He was lighter than she expected, his ribs faintly visible beneath his soft cream-colored fur. His small head rested on her shoulder, and she could hear the faint wheeze in his breathing. "Just be patient with him," the worker said gently. "He's been through a lot." Emily nodded, holding Oliver a little tighter. She wasn't afraid of the challenges. In fact, she felt strangely certain that this little dog was meant to be with her. The drive home was quiet. Oliver sat in the passenger seat, curled into a blanket Emily had brought, his eyes half closed but always watching her. The rain tapped steadily against the windshield, creating a cocoon-like calm in the car. For the first time in what felt like years, Emily didn't feel alone. When they arrived, Oliver hesitated at the doorway of Emily's small apartment. He sniffed cautiously, taking a step forward and then retreating as though he wasn't sure this new place was real or safe. Emily knelt down, extending her hand. "It's okay, Oliver. This is home now," she whispered. It took time, but eventually, Oliver shuffled inside, his nails clicking softly against the wooden floor. He moved tentatively from room to room, his ears perked at every new sound. Emily noticed how quickly he became startled. A dropped spoon, the hum of the refrigerator, all seemed to make him flinch. It was clear that whatever he had endured before the shelters had left its mark. That first night, Emily set a small bed for him near her own. But when the lights went out, she heard a soft whimpering. Oliver was curled into himself, shaking. Emily reached out her hand from the bed, resting it gently on his back. The moment her touch reached him, he let out a long sigh and finally closed his eyes, drifting into sleep. Over the next few days, Emily discovered how fragile Oliver truly was. His breathing often sounded labored, and he tired quickly after short walks. Sometimes, he seemed to retreat into his shell, staring blankly as if memories of rejection still haunted him. Emily's heart ached watching him struggle, but she refused to let despair take over. Instead, she began building small moments of trust. She hand-fed him his meals, speaking softly as he ate. She carried him in her arms to the park, letting him feel the fresh grass under his paws without overwhelming him. Slowly, Oliver's tail began to wag more often. Slowly, his eyes began to soften. But challenges were constant. A neighbor, upon seeing Oliver wheezing one afternoon, remarked, "Why would you take in a sickly dog like that? He won't last long." The words stung, but Emily ignored them. She knew that Oliver's worth wasn't defined by how others saw him. To her, he wasn't a burden. He was a chance to love again, to rebuild herself through caring for another life. One evening, as Emily sat on the couch reading, Oliver climbed up beside her uninvited. He curled into her side, his head pressing against her ribs. For the first time, he sought comfort not because he needed it to survive, but because he trusted her. Emily closed her book and stroked his back, tears forming in her eyes. "This is just the beginning, isn't it?" she whispered. Neither of them knew it yet, but their bond would soon be tested in ways neither had expected. And through those trials, Oliver would prove to everyone, including himself, that he was far more than just a sickly dog. The first weeks with Oliver had been tender, filled with quiet moments of trust slowly blooming. Emily thought she was prepared for anything, but life had a way of testing her resolve sooner than she expected. It was a Sunday morning when she first noticed it. Oliver had been playing with a small squeaky toy she'd bought him, his stubby legs chasing it clumsily across the living room floor. But after only a few minutes, he collapsed onto his side, panting heavily. His small chest rose and fell in uneven rhythms, and the faint wheezing that Emily had grown used to suddenly deepened into a rasp. "Oliver!" Her voice cracked as she rushed to him. The puppy lifted his head weakly, his eyes glassy, his tiny tongue pushing past his lips as if air was hard to come by. Panic surged through Emily's veins. She scooped him into her arms and grabbed her keys without another thought. The drive to the emergency vet felt like the longest of her life. Rain lashed against the windshield, and every red light felt like betrayal. Emily kept glancing at the passenger seat, where Oliver lay wrapped in the same blanket she had brought him home in. She whispered over and over, "Stay with me, baby. Just stay with me." At the clinic, the vet techs whisked him away the moment Emily stepped through the door. She stood frozen in the sterile waiting room, the sound of her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. Around her, posters of healthy, happy pets mocked the fear that consumed her. She had only just found Oliver. Could she really lose him now? Minutes felt like hours until finally the veterinarian, Dr. Sanchez, approached. The older woman's face was calm, but her eyes were serious. "Oliver has a congenital respiratory condition," she explained gently. "It's common in brachycephalic breeds like French bulldogs. His airway is narrower, which makes it hard for him to breathe, especially when he exerts himself." Emily's hands trembled. Is he going to be okay?" Dr. Sanchez hesitated. "He's stable for now, but his condition will require ongoing care. It won't be easy. You'll need to watch him closely, limit his activity, and he may need surgery down the line." The words hit Emily like a wave. She had already been warned by neighbors, by strangers, even by the shelter staff. Oliver was a fragile dog. Many would have seen this as the moment to walk away. But as she stood there, all Emily could think about was the way Oliver's eyes had met hers that first night, the trust he had placed in her hand when no one else wanted him. "No," she whispered firmly. "I won't give up on him." When Oliver was finally brought back to her, his tiny body trembling but his tail giving the faintest wag, Emily held him as though she were holding the most precious treasure in the world. She pressed her forehead against his and whispered, "We'll fight this together, I promise." The ride home that night was quiet. Oliver lay against her lap this time, exhausted but safe. Emily realized that their journey wouldn't be about perfection or ease. It would be about resilience, about refusing to surrender even when the odds seemed stacked against them. She didn't know it yet, but this challenge would forge a bond stronger than anything she could have imagined. Oliver wasn't just her dog now, he was her family, her partner in courage. Life with Oliver after his first health scare was anything but simple. Emily learned quickly that caring for him would require not just patience, but resilience in the face of constant judgment. Every day, she carefully measured his meals, ensured his water was always fresh, and carried him up and down the stairs of her apartment building to spare his fragile lungs. She built their daily routine around his needs: short walks in the cool morning air, long naps on soft blankets, and gentle play sessions that wouldn't strain his breathing. To Emily, these sacrifices weren't sacrifices at all. They were acts of love. But to others, they looked like foolishness. One afternoon, as Emily carried Oliver home from the park, her neighbor Mrs. Holloway, a sharp-tongued woman in her 60s, shook her head disapprovingly. "That poor thing," she muttered. "Why keep him alive if he's suffering? You'll only end up breaking your own heart." The words cut Emily deeply. She forced a polite smile but felt anger rise in her chest. She wanted to shout that Oliver wasn't suffering. He was thriving in ways that mattered, even if they didn't fit other people's standards. Another time, at the grocery store, Emily overheard two women whispering after they spotted Oliver, sitting patiently in his stroller. "Look at that," one said. "A stroller for a dog? Ridiculous. She should have adopted a healthy one instead." Emily clenched her fists, her cheeks burning with shame and fury. She pushed the cart forward, refusing to let their ignorance ruin her day, but their words lingered in her mind like a thorn. Yet in the quiet moments at home, all doubts faded. On nights when loneliness once haunted her, Oliver curled against her side, his steady breathing a reminder that neither of them was alone anymore. He had been abandoned by 3 shelters, labeled unwanted and broken, but with Emily he was loved. That love gave him courage, and gave Emily a strength she never knew she had. The turning point came one evening when Emily invited her younger brother, Mark, over for dinner. Mark was skeptical of Emily's devotion to the fragile little French bulldog. "You're spending so much money on vet bills," he said as he leaned against the counter. "Don't you think it would have been better to adopt a healthier dog? One that could, actually live a normal life?" Emily's heart pounded. She placed her fork down and met her brother's eyes with unwavering determination. Oliver is living a normal life. His life may look different, but it's no less valuable. He deserves love and care just like any other dog. As if sensing the tension, Oliver waddled over and rested his head on Emily's foot, his eyes wide and trusting. Emily bent down and scooped him into her arms, pressing a kiss to the top of his head. This little guy was thrown away by everyone else, she continued, her voice breaking. But he chose me, and I choose him every single day. That's not a burden, that's a privilege. For the first time, Mark said nothing. He simply nodded, his expression softening as he reached out to scratch behind Oliver's ears. The puppy's tiny tail wagged, and Emily saw something shift in her brother's eyes. A quiet recognition of the bond they shared. Outside, the whispers of doubt still followed Emily wherever she went. But inside her heart, a new kind of strength was blooming. The world might see Oliver as fragile, but Emily knew the truth. He was a fighter, and together they were unstoppable. What Emily didn't realize was that their greatest test was still to come, one that would shake everything they had built and force her to prove just how far she was willing to go for the little bulldog who had already changed her life. It was a stormy Thursday evening when Emily's greatest fear came true. Rain hammered against the apartment windows, and thunder rumbled like an angry drum in the sky. Oliver had always been sensitive to storms, the loud cracks sending him trembling into Emily's arms. But that night something was different. As the wind howled outside, Oliver suddenly began to wheeze violently. His tiny chest heaved, his nostrils flared, and the sound of his labored breathing filled the room like a cry for help. Emily dropped the mug she was holding, porcelain shattering across the kitchen floor, as she rushed to him. "Oliver, stay with me, baby, please," she cried, scooping him into her arms. His small body felt limp, his eyes wide with panic as if he couldn't get enough air. Emily grabbed her keys, adrenaline coursing through her veins. She bolted through the rain, her heart pounding as she carried Oliver to the car. The storm made the roads slick and dangerous, wipers working furiously as she drove through sheets of rain. She whispered through trembling lips, "Don't leave me, Oliver. Not now. Not ever." By the time she arrived at the emergency clinic, Emily's clothes were drenched, her hair plastered against her face. She burst through the doors, shouting for help. A team of vet techs rushed forward, pulling Oliver from her arms and disappearing behind swinging doors. Emily stood frozen, shaking, her heart tearing itself apart in her chest. Minutes crawled by like hours. She sat in the waiting room, her soaked sweater clinging to her skin, her hands trembling uncontrollably. Every tick of the clock was torture. Every sound from the back made her flinch. Finally, Dr. Sanchez emerged, her face etched with exhaustion but also determination. "Oliver had a severe airway collapse," she explained. "We managed to stabilize him, but it was close, very close. He'll need surgery soon if he's going to have a real chance." Emily's breath caught. "Surgery? Is it dangerous?" Dr. Sanchez nodded solemnly. "Yes, but without it, these episodes will keep happening. And one day we might not get to him in time." The choice was devastating, but Emily knew it wasn't really a choice at all. She looked into the doctor's eyes, then down at her trembling hands. "Do it, whatever it takes. Just save him." That night, as Oliver lay sedated in the recovery room, Emily pressed her hand against the glass of his kennel. He looked so small, so fragile, yet still fighting, always fighting. Tears streamed down her face as she whispered, "I promised you we'd fight together, and I meant it." The storm outside raged on, but inside the clinic, Emily realized something she had never allowed herself to say out loud before. Oliver wasn't just a dog. He was her family, her anchor, the one who had taught her what unconditional love truly meant, and she would move mountains to keep him safe. What Emily didn't know was that this night would mark the beginning of the hardest chapter of their journey, a test not just of Oliver's strength, but of her own courage to face heartbreak, hope, and the possibility of a miracle. The morning of Oliver's surgery felt like a blur. Emily had barely slept, lying awake through the night, listening to the silence of her apartment without his soft snores beside her. The empty blanket on the couch where he usually curled up seemed unbearable. She made coffee, but it went cold on the counter, untouched. Every thought in her mind was consumed by one question. Would Oliver make it through today? When she arrived at the clinic, Oliver wagged his tiny tail weakly from inside his kennel. His eyes lit up the moment he saw her, as if he wanted to reassure her that everything would be okay. Emily pressed her face against the bars, whispering, "You're so brave, my sweet boy. Please keep fighting." Dr. Sanchez went over the procedure once more, her voice steady but realistic. "We'll be widening his airway to help him breathe better. It's delicate, and there are risks, but Oliver is strong. We'll do everything we can." Emily nodded, tears already stinging her eyes. She kissed Oliver gently on the head, inhaling the familiar scent of him, and whispered a promise she'd whispered countless times before. "I'll be right here waiting. Always." Then they wheeled him away. The waiting room became Emily's prison. She sat clutching the blanket she had brought from home, her knuckles white, her legs trembling with restless energy. Around her, other pet owners came and went, their stories beginning and ending, but Emily's world stood still. She prayed silently to God, to fate, to anyone listening. Hours dragged on, every passing minute stretching her heart tighter. At one point, a receptionist placed a hand on her shoulder. "He's still in surgery. The doctor's taking every precaution." It was meant to reassure, but Emily could barely breathe under the weight of her fear. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Dr. Sanchez walked into the waiting room. Emily shot to her feet, searching the doctor's expression for an answer. "He's stable," Dr. Sanchez said softly, a small smile breaking through. "The surgery went as planned. Oliver's resting now. It'll be a tough recovery, but he made it." The relief that crashed over Emily was indescribable. Her knees nearly buckled, and tears poured down her face in unstoppable streams. She clasped Dr. Sanchez's hands, whispering, "Thank you so much." When Emily was finally allowed to see him, Oliver lay under warm blankets, an oxygen tube helping him breathe. His body looked fragile, but his little tail wagged slowly when he caught sight of her. That tiny wag was the most beautiful thing Emily had ever seen. She leaned down, pressing her forehead against his, whispering through tears, "You did it. You're the bravest soul I've ever known." Over the next few days, Emily never left his side. She fed him by hand, stroked his fur when pain made him whimper, and hummed softly so he wouldn't feel alone. The road ahead would be long, but for the first time in weeks, Emily allowed herself to believe in hope, because Oliver had survived. He had fought through the storm, the surgery, and the odds stacked against him. And Emily knew in her heart that their story was far from over. Still, the true test wasn't just surviving surgery. It was proving that love, patience, and resilience could turn a life once deemed unwanted into a story of triumph. The final chapter of their journey would show just how powerful that love could be. Weeks passed, and each day Oliver grew a little stronger. His breathing, once shallow and ragged, became smoother and more steady. The first time Emily saw him dash clumsily across the living room floor without stopping to gasp for air, she burst into tears of joy. It was a moment so simple, yet monumental, proof that he had not only survived but was learning how to truly live. Recovery wasn't without its challenges. There were sleepless nights when Oliver whimpered from the discomfort of healing, and Emily would sit beside him, stroking his ears until he settled. There were moments of doubt, too, when fear whispered in her mind, "What if something goes wrong again?" But every time she looked at him, those fears were replaced by something stronger, love and determination. The world around them began to notice the transformation. Neighbors who had once muttered judgment now paused to admire Oliver's progress. The same woman who once shook her head disapprovingly now stopped Emily in the hallway, smiling awkwardly. "He looks happy," she admitted. And indeed, Oliver's bright eyes and playful energy spoke louder than any defense Emily could have given. One Saturday morning, Emily took Oliver back to the park where their journey together had begun. The sun poured golden light across the grass, and children laughed in the distance. Oliver trotted proudly at her side, his little legs moving with newfound confidence. Strangers stopped to pet him, and instead of questioning his worth, they praised his strength. "Is he a rescue?" a young man asked, kneeling to scratch Oliver's chin. "Yes," Emily said, smiling as Oliver's tail wagged enthusiastically. Rescued and a fighter. In that moment, Emily realized just how far they had come. The dog who had been abandoned by 3 shelters, labeled as too much trouble, had not only survived but thrived. And in saving him, Emily had discovered a resilience in herself she never knew existed. That evening, back at home, Oliver curled against her on the couch. His snores were gentle now, steady and reassuring. Emily rested her hand on his back, feeling the rise and fall of his breaths, each one a reminder of the battle they had won together. "Thank you for choosing me," she whispered, her voice breaking with emotion. "You've given me more than I could ever give you." As the room filled with quiet peace, Emily understood the lesson Oliver had brought into her life. Love is not about perfection or ease. It's about loyalty in the hardest moments, about refusing to give up when the world says it's easier to walk away. Oliver wasn't just her dog. He was her family, her inspiration, her daily reminder that courage and love can change everything. And for anyone who looked at them now, there was no doubt. This little French bulldog, once unwanted and forgotten, had finally found the place where he truly belonged. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share it with someone who loves inspiring stories. Together, we can spread more messages of courage, compassion, and the unbreakable bond between humans and their dogs.